The frigid Montana wind howled through the canyon as Isabella Morgan clutched her infant daughter against her chest, each labored step sinking deeper into the snow. Behind her, black smoke rose from the charred remains of the stagecoach, the bodies of her husband and the other passengers already disappearing beneath the relentless blizzard. Ahead, only wilderness stretched for miles, wilderness and the growing certainty of death. As darkness fell and her strength ebbed, Isabella spotted a faint light in the distance, flickering like a dying star against the mountain's shadow. From a hidden ridge above, weathered eyes tracked her desperate journey through a brass spyglass. Caleb Thorne, once the most renowned gunsmith west of the Mississippi, now a ghost to the world he'd abandoned, lowered his rifle and made a decision that would alter both their fates forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin stood defiant against the Montana wilderness, its weathered logs and stone chimney barely visible through the dense pine forest that surrounded it. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared abandoned, just another failed homestead, claimed by the merciless frontier. This was precisely the impression Caleb Thorne had cultivated over the 15 years since he'd vanished from civilization. At 57, Caleb's once black hair had turned steel gray, his face carved with lines that told stories he refused to share. His right hand, once considered the steadiest in the business, bore the scars of that final catastrophe in St. Louis, the accident that had claimed 5 lives, including that of Governor Hammond's son. Though the courts had cleared him of wrongdoing, the whispers never stopped. The perfect Thorne rifle that exploded during a demonstration, the celebrated gunsmith who'd become careless, the blood that couldn't be washed away. So Caleb had disappeared, traveling north until the mountains themselves provided the isolation he craved. Here he continued his craft in secret, his workshop built into the hillside behind his cabin, accessible only through a hidden doorway behind his stone hearth. The workshop contained tools and equipment that would have been the envy of any gunsmith in the country, precision instruments he'd designed himself, specialized forges that reached precise temperatures, and materials sourced from across the continent during his rare, disguised trips to distant trading posts. Though he no longer sold his creations, Caleb continued to refine his art, each weapon more perfect than the last, then disassembled once completed. The craft was all that remained to him, the pursuit of perfection without purpose, creation without consequence. His routine rarely varied. Each morning began before dawn, with a careful patrol of the 7 trigger wires that surrounded his property. A complex alarm system that alerted him to any approach, human or animal. After checking his hunting traps, he would spend hours in his workshop, break only for a sparse meal at midday, then continue until his eyes could no longer focus on the intricate mechanisms before him. This particular morning had started differently. The northern trigger wire had snapped during the night. Unusual, as the system was designed to withstand the weight of deer and even bears without activating. Only human intrusion or exceptionally large predators could break the reinforced cords. Caleb had tracked the disturbance through fresh snow until he reached the ridge overlooking the old stagecoach trail. There, through his spyglass, he'd witnessed the aftermath of violence, the burned stagecoach, the bodies already being reclaimed by the wilderness, and a lone figure struggling through the snow, clutching something to its chest. "Damn fools! Traveling these passes in winter," he muttered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The Blackwater gang had been growing bolder, according to the snippets of news Caleb gleaned during his infrequent supply runs. The stagecoach attack fit their pattern: robbery, murder, no survivors to identify them. Except, it appeared, there was one survivor, struggling northward towards certain death. The nearest settlement was 40 miles away. Caleb had prepared to turned back toward his cabin when he caught the unmistakable sound, faint but clear in the mountain air. A baby's cry, something long dormant stirred in his chest, an unwelcome intruder in the fortress of his isolation. He raised the spyglass again, focusing more carefully on the figure below. A woman, barely more than a girl, clutching not possessions, but an infant, wrapped in what appeared to be her own shawl, while she herself faced the bitter cold with only a thin coat. Yet as he turned to leave, the faces from St. Louis flashed before him, the young men who had died when his rifle shattered, their features forever frozen in that last moment of surprise before oblivion. Faces that visited him in dreams, accusing him not of technical failure, but of the greater sin, the arrogance that had made him rush a design to meet the governor's deadline, the pride that wouldn't allow him to admit the weapon needed more testing. "Not your concern," he told himself firmly, securing his rifle across his back. "Nature's way, strong survive, weak don't." He had taken 3 steps back toward his cabin when the baby's cry came again, sharper now, more desperate. A sound that belonged to life, not to the silent realm of snow and death that surrounded him. Caleb stopped, his breath forming small clouds that dissipated in the frigid air. Down in the valley, the woman stumbled, falling to her knees before struggling back. To her feet, her determination visible even at this distance. She was fighting with everything she had, not for herself, he realized, but for the child. In that moment, something shifted in Caleb Thorne, imperceptible perhaps to anyone else, but seismic within the carefully constructed fortress of his isolation. Not compassion exactly, for he had walked that away years ago, but recognition of a will to survive that matched the harsh landscape itself. Cursing under his breath, he changed direction, moving swiftly down the ridge toward the struggling figure. His approach was silent, years of hunting having taught him to move through snow without sound. The woman didn't notice him until he was 20 yards away, and when she did, her reaction surprised him. Instead of relief, she clutched the baby tighter and reached inside her coat, producing a small Derringer pistol, which she aimed at him with. A trembling but determined hand. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse from cold and exertion. "I've nothing worth stealing, and I'll die before you touch my daughter." Caleb raised his hands slowly, keeping his distance. "I'm not with them," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "The ones who attacked your coach." Her eyes, bright with fever yet alert with maternal instinct, assessed him warily. "Then who are you?" "Someone who lives nearby. You won't survive the night out here." He gestured toward the distant peaks where dark clouds were gathering. "Another storm's coming." The woman swayed slightly, the pistol dipping before she steadied it. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," Caleb answered truthfully. "But that child will be dead within hours in this cold, and you not long after." At the mention of her baby, something broke in the woman's resolve. She glanced down at the bundle against her chest, where small whimpering sounds had replaced the earlier cries. The infant's face, visible now to Caleb, had a bluish tinge around the lips that spoke of advancing hypothermia. "I can't," the woman began, then stumbled forward as her strength finally failed. Caleb moved quickly, catching her before she fell. The pistol dropped harmlessly into the snow as she collapsed against him, the baby clutched protectively even in her semi-conscious state. He pried the infant gently from her grasp, tucking the small bundle inside his own coat next to his body heat, then lifted the woman over his shoulder. The trek back to his cabin was arduous, the woman's unconscious weight and the precious cargo inside his coat slowing his normally swift pace. By the time they reached his hidden dwelling, the first heavy snowflakes of the new storm were beginning to fall, erasing their tracks behind them. Inside, Caleb worked with practiced efficiency, building up the fire in his hearth to a roaring blaze, then creating a pallet of furs near its warmth. He placed the woman there, noting the wedding band on her finger and the quality of her clothes beneath the travel dirt. Not wealthy, but respectable. The kind of person who would be missed. The baby, a girl no more than 6 months old, had stopped. Crying, a dangerous sign. Working quickly, Caleb heated water, filling metal flasks that he wrapped in cloth and placed around the infant's tiny body. Her skin was cold to the touch, her breathing shallow, but as warmth gradually returned, so did her color and her cries, weak at first, then gaining strength. The woman's condition was more complex. Beyond the cold, she had a bullet wound in her left shoulder, inexpertly bandaged and now infected. Fever burned through her, and her breathing was labored and uneven. As Caleb cleaned and redressed her wound, applying a poultice of herbs he gathered from the forest, he considered his situation with growing unease. He had broken his self-imposed exile, invited the outside world, with all its complications and dangers, back into his carefully ordered existence. Once the woman stabilized, if she survived, there would be questions. She would need to be returned to civilization. People would come looking. His sanctuary would be compromised. The baby girl, now warm and fed with a mixture of goat's milk and honey from Caleb's modest stores, gazed up at him with solemn, dark eyes that seemed to hold him accountable, in a way no one had for 15 years. "This changes nothing," he told the infant as he awkwardly cradled her. "Once your mama's fit to travel, you both go. Understand?" The baby's only response was to grip his calloused finger with surprising strength, a gesture that sent an unexpected jolt through Caleb's carefully armored heart. Outside, the blizzard descended in full fury, sealing them in a white cocoon that separated them from the rest of the world. For now, at least, Caleb's decision had been postponed by forces beyond his control. No one would be traveling in either direction until the storm passed. In the workshop, hidden behind his hearth, the disassembled pieces of his latest creation lay in perfect order, awaiting his return to the familiar solitude of his craft. But for the first time in 15 years, Caleb Thorne found himself occupied with a different kind of work, the preservation of life, rather than the perfection of its potential destruction. As night fell on the hidden cabin, the gunsmith sat, vigil beside the unconscious woman and her child, watching for signs of improvement or decline, prepared to battle death with the same precision he brought to his metalwork. Though he wouldn't have admitted it even to himself, something long dormant had awakened within him, a connection to the world of the living, with all its messiness and vulnerability, its pain and its promise. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 days passed before Isabella Morgan opened her eyes. The blizzard had raged unabated, blanketing the mountains in 6 feet of fresh snow and sealing the cabin in a cocoon of white silence. Caleb had maintained his vigil, catching sleep in short bursts while monitoring the fever that had nearly claimed the young woman's life. The infection in her shoulder wound had proven stubborn, resisting his herbal remedies until he'd resorted to more drastic measures, cauterizing the edges of the wound with a heated blade. The procedure, performed while she remained unconscious, had finally turned the tide. By the 3rd morning, her breathing had steadied, and the unnatural flush had faded from her cheeks. The infant had proven more resilient than her mother. After those first critical hours, the baby had rallied with surprising strength, accepting the improvised milk mixture Caleb prepared and sleeping contentedly in a crate he'd lined with rabbit furs. During her waking hours, she watched him with unnervingly focused eyes, rarely crying unless hungry or uncomfortable. "You're a strange one," Caleb told her as he awkwardly changed a diaper fashioned from one of his old shirts. "Most babies would be raising hell by now." It was during one such moment, with the baby balanced on his knee as he secured the makeshift diaper, that Isabella first regained consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to terror as she registered. Her unfamiliar surroundings and the sight of her child in a stranger's hands. "Emma," she gasped, attempting to rise and immediately falling back as pain seared through her wounded shoulder. Caleb turned the baby, Emma, secure in his grasp. "Stay still," he advised, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You'll tear open that wound." Again, Isabella's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the rough-hewn furniture, the arsenal of weapons mounted on the walls, and the imposing figure of her rescuer. Recognition flickered across her face. "You... from the snow. You helped us." Caleb nodded once, crossing to her side and carefully placing Emma in her outstretched arm, the one unaffected by her injury. The reunion between mother and child brought an unexpected tightness to his throat, which he disguised with a gruff cough. "Water," he offered, holding a tin cup to her lips when she nodded. As she drank, he assessed her condition with clinical detachment. The fever had broken, and her eyes were clear and alert. With proper rest and nourishment, she would recover, physically, at least. The emotional wounds of whatever had transpired at the stagecoach would take longer to heal. "My husband," Isabella asked after draining the cup, through her eyes suggesting she already knew the answer. "Didn't check them all," Caleb replied honestly. "But from what I saw, no survivors except you two." Isabella closed her eyes, a single tear tracking down her cheek as she clutched Emma closer. "Daniel tried to protect us. When the shooting started, he pushed us under the seat, said to stay hidden no matter what happened." Caleb moved away, giving her space for grief, while he busied himself at his crude cooking area. "Stagecoach shouldn't have been running that past this time of year," he said after a moment. "Driver should have known better." "We had no choice," Isabella replied, her voice steadying as she focused on her daughter's peaceful face. "They were coming for us in Silverton. Daniel said we couldn't wait for spring." This information provoked a frown from Caleb. "Who was coming?" Isabella hesitated, studying him with newfound wariness. "I don't even know your name." "Thorne," he answered, deliberately omitting his first name. "And you're Isabella Morgan. Found papers in your coat while I was treating your wound." She nodded, apparently unsurprised by his thoroughness. "And you live here? Alone?" "Yes." He returned with a bowl of venison stew, helping her into a semi-upright position against a folded blanket. "Eat, then rest. Questions can wait." But Isabella Morgan was not easily deterred, even as she accepted the stew and began eating with the intensity of someone who hadn't had proper food in days. Her eyes remained fixed on Caleb with evaluating intelligence. "They were Bannister's men," she said between careful spoonfuls. "Wyatt Bannister." The name meant nothing to Caleb, and he said as much with a non-committal grunt. "He owns half of Colorado now," Isabella continued. "Mines, railroads, banks. Daniel worked for his surveying company, mapping routes for the new rail lines." She paused, glancing down at Emma, who had fallen asleep against her chest. 6 months ago, Daniel discovered something in the southeastern territory, a canyon passage that would save the railroad 50 miles of track and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the passage ran through a creek that feeds the Colorado River. Understanding dawned on Caleb. "Watershed rights," Isabella nodded. "Bannister planned to dam the creek, divert it for his steam engines. Would have dried up water sources for 3 settlements downstream. Daniel took his findings to the territorial governor instead of Bannister, and made an enemy," Caleb concluded. "The familiar dynamics of power and corruption requiring no elaboration. Bannister offered money first. When Daniel refused, the threats began." She swallowed hard. 2 weeks ago, our home burned down while we were at church. The next day, Daniel's assistant was found beaten to death. That's when we decided to run." She stared into the fire, its light casting haunted shadows across her face. "We were heading for Montana Territory, to my aunt's homestead near Fort Benton. Daniel thought we'd be beyond Bannister's reach there." Caleb absorbed this information. Silently, its implications unsettling the careful isolation he had constructed. The Blackwater gang's attack on the stagecoach had not been a random robbery. It had been a targeted assassination. And if Isabella was correct in her assessment, the powerful man behind it would not be satisfied until both she and the child were confirmed dead. Which meant that sheltering them, even temporarily, placed him directly in the path of forces he had spent 15 years avoiding. "How long before the snow clears?" Isabella asked, as if reading his thoughts. "A week, maybe more." Caleb took the now empty bowl from her hands. "Pass is treacherous even without fresh snow. No one travels it. Before April most years. Then we've imposed on your hospitality until then," she said formally. "I promise we'll leave as soon as it's safe to travel." The statement should have relieved him. Instead, Caleb found himself considering the practicalities of a young woman, and infant traveling alone through mountain wilderness, pursued by hired killers. "We'll see," was all he said, rising to place another log on the fire. As night fell, Caleb retreated to his workshop, sliding the hidden door in the hearth aside, after ensuring Isabella had fallen asleep again. The familiar environment, with its organized tools and meticulous designs, usually brought him peace. Tonight, it only emphasized how thoroughly his carefully ordered existence had been disrupted. On his workbench lay the components of his latest design, a rifle with an innovative firing mechanism that reduced recoil while increasing accuracy. He had been 2 days from completing it when the trigger wire had alerted him to Isabella's presence. Caleb sat at his bench, hands automatically reaching for his tools, but his thoughts remained in the cabin's main room where mother and child slept. The story Isabella had shared was depressingly familiar, the powerful trampling of the principled, corruption masquerading as progress, and those who stood for truth marked for elimination. It was precisely the world he had abandoned after St. Louis. Yet, as he fitted the delicate spring assembly into the rifle's action, Caleb found himself considering options that would have been unthinkable days ago. Isabella's aunt's homestead near Fort Benton would still be her logical destination once the pass is cleared, but the journey would be perilous for a lone woman with a child, especially with Bannister's men potentially waiting at key junctures. Logical solution, the only solution that gave them a reasonable chance of survival, would require not just his temporary shelter, but his active involvement in delivering them to safety. "Not your fight," he reminded himself, tightening a precision screw with practiced fingers. "Not your concern what happens once they leave." But even as he formed the thought, Caleb knew something fundamental had shifted. The baby's trusting eyes. As he fed her, Isabella's determination to protect her child at any cost, these had awakened dormant parts of himself he had believed long dead after that day in St. Louis. More troubling was the realization that if he turned them away once the snow cleared, he would be condemning them as surely as if he'd pulled the trigger himself. The moral clarity of this fact stood in stark contrast to the comfortable ambiguity of his isolation. Caleb worked through the night, his hands continuing the familiar patterns of his craft, while his mind traced unfamiliar territories of obligation and connection. By dawn, when Emma's hungry cries penetrated the workshop's thick walls, he had reached no resolution, but he had completed the rifle, the finest he had ever created. Instead of disassembling it as he normally would, he loaded it carefully and placed it on the rack beside his work table, a weapon with purpose, not merely perfection. Whether that purpose was protection or defense remained to be seen, but the unconscious decision spoke volumes about the changes already taking shape within the Reclusive Gunsmith's carefully ordered world. The next week brought an uneasy routine to Caleb's cabin. As Isabella regained her strength, she insisted on contributing to the household tasks despite his gruff objections. By the 5th day, she had reorganized his meager kitchen supplies, established a proper washing area near the hearth, and transformed the chaotic pile of furs that had served as her sickbed into a tidy pallet for herself and Emma. Caleb observed these changes with mixed feelings. The practical side of him acknowledged that her efficient arrangements improved the cabin's livability. The part of him that cherished isolation and control bristled at each alteration to his carefully constructed world. "Your stores won't last the winter if we stay much longer," Isabella remarked one morning as she inventoried his food supplies, "not with 3 mouths to feed." Caleb, cleaning his hunting rifle by the fire, grunted non-committally. "Got traps set. Snow's letting up enough. To check them today." Isabella nodded, bouncing Emma gently as the baby fussed. "I could help with preparation if you bring something back. I'm not useless in the kitchen." "Never said you were." Caleb assembled his rifle with practiced movements, his eyes never leaving the weapon. "Fever's gone, but your shoulder needs time. Don't tear those stitches." It was as close to concern as he'd openly expressed since her recovery began, and Isabella acknowledged it with a small smile. "Yes, sir, Mr. Thorne," she replied, a hint of teasing in her voice that made him look up sharply. The familiarity disconcerted him. During her week of recovery, Isabella had made numerous attempts to learn more about her rescuer, and Caleb had deflected each query with increasing discomfort. He had revealed nothing of his past, his full name, or the reasons for his solitary existence deep in the Montana wilderness. Yet she had persisted with a gentle stubbornness that reminded him uncomfortably of another woman, long ago, one whose memory he had buried alongside his former identity. Bundling up against the cold, Caleb escaped to the forest, following the paths to his traplines with a relief that bordered on desperation. The familiar task of checking each carefully set mechanism, replacing bait, and harvesting the occasional rabbit or marten restored his sense of control and purpose. By midday, his pack contained 3 rabbits and a fat grouse that had wandered into a snare, enough meat for several days. He was preparing to return when he caught sight of tracks in the fresh snow near his furthest trapline. Human tracks. 2 sets, heading north along the ridge that overlooked his hidden valley. Caleb crouched, examining the imprints with growing concern. The boots were large, with distinctive heel patterns that suggested expensive, town-made footwear rather than practical wilderness moccasins. More telling was their pattern, methodical, evenly spaced, with frequent stops at overlooked points. Not the tracks of hunters or trappers, but of men searching for something or someone. Following the tracks at a cautious distance, Caleb moved silently through the snow-laden pine forest. Years of hunting had taught him to step precisely where. The soft needle bed would muffle his approach, to use the wind direction to carry sound away rather than toward his quarry. After a half-mile, he caught sight of them. 2 men in heavy winter coats that failed to conceal the outline of holstered weapons. They stood at the edge of a cliff that offered a sweeping view of the valley below, including the barely visible smoke from his cabin chimney. "Nothing but wilderness for 20 miles, the taller man was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "Waste of time, if you ask me. No woman and baby could have survived that blizzard on foot." Bannister's instructions were clear. His companion replied, adjusting the expensive binoculars he held. "We search every inch until we find bodies. No remains, no payment. Been a week since the stage job. Wolves would have left nothing by now." Then we find what the wolves left. The second man lowered his binoculars, scanning the valley with methodical precision. Bannister wants proof they didn't survive. Can't have Morgan's widow showing up with evidence later. What about that smoke down there? The second man focused his binoculars on the thin column rising from Caleb's chimney. Trapper's cabin, most likely. Might be worth checking. Could have seen something. Caleb felt a cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. Bannister's men had followed the stagecoach route, looking for confirmation of Isabella and Emma's deaths. Now their search had led them to the edge of his sanctuary. Moving back through the forest, Caleb circled behind the men, studying their equipment and weapons with a professional eye. Both carried Remington revolvers in cross-draw holsters. The taller one had a Winchester repeating rifle slung over his shoulder, while his companion relied on the accuracy of his binoculars rather than additional firepower. Their expensive gear and casual discussion of murder spoke of professional killers rather than common outlaws, men who killed for payment rather than passion or desperation. More dangerous, in Caleb's experience, because they approached death as a business transaction rather than an emotional act. He considered his options with calculated precision. The simplest solution would be to eliminate the threat immediately. From his position in the dense pines, neither man would see the shot coming. 2 quick pulls of the trigger, and the danger to Isabella and Emma would be reduced significantly. But 2 dead bodies in the wilderness would raise questions. More men would come searching, not just for Isabella and Emma, but for their missing colleagues. The ripples would expand, eventually reaching his hidden cabin. Alternatively, he could allow them to continue their search, hoping the vastness of the wilderness would keep his cabin concealed. A dangerous gamble, especially since they had already spotted his chimney smoke. The third option was to reveal himself, a solitary trapper, wary but not hostile, who knew nothing of any stagecoach passengers. He might direct them away from his valley, toward more distant terrain, where no tracks would be found. As Caleb deliberated, the choice was suddenly made for him. The cracking of a branch beneath his foot, a sound so slight he barely registered it, caused both men to whirl around, hands dropping to their weapons. "Who's there?" the taller man called, his Winchester already halfway to his shoulder. Caleb stepped into view, his own rifle pointed casually toward the ground, his posture deliberately non-threatening. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, adopting the rough accent and simple speech patterns of a mountain trapper. "Don't get many visitors this time of year." The men exchanged glances, their hands remaining close to their weapons. "You live around here?" the second man asked, his tone carefully neutral. Caleb nodded, using his free hand to gesture vaguely southward, away from his actual cabin. "Got a place about 5 miles yonder. Saw your tracks. Thought maybe you boys were after my trap lines." "Where?" "Searching for survivors from a stagecoach robbery," the taller man said, studying Caleb's face for any reaction. "Week ago, along the pass. Woman and a baby might have escaped." Caleb furrowed his brow, the perfect picture of confusion. "Stage don't run that fast in winter. Too dangerous." "This one did. Have you seen any sign of a woman traveling with an infant? Or bodies?" "Ain't seen anybody since the first snow, 'cept you 2. Caleb shrugged. "Wolves have been active, though. Found what was left of a deer yesterday. Not much to speak of." The second man stepped forward, his hand now resting openly on his holstered revolver. "That you smoke down in the valley?" "Nope. My place is south, like I said." Caleb met the man's gaze steadily. "Might be old man Hawkins. Keeps to himself mostly. Mean as a rattler if you surprise him." "Worth checking," the taller man said to his companion. "We've got daylight for a few more hours." The second man continued to study Caleb, suspicion evident in his narrowed eyes. "You got a name, trapper?" "Jenkins," Caleb replied without hesitation. "Most folks call me Old Jenk." "Well, Old Jenk, You see any sign of that woman and baby? There's $50 in it for you. Bannister Mining Company's offering a reward for information. Caleb nodded slowly, as if considering the substantial sum. I'll keep an eye out. Where would I find this Bannister if I got something to report? Company office in Helena. Or you can tell any of our search parties. We've got men combing these mountains, from the pass to the territorial border. This information sent a chill through Caleb that he was careful not to show. Multiple search parties meant significantly increased risk of discovery, regardless of how well hidden his cabin might be. Might check north of here, he suggested, pointing toward a particularly rugged section of the range. Seen smoke from those ridges last week. Thought it might be Blackfoot, so I steered clear. The men exchanged glances again, this time with renewed interest. Worth investigating, the taller one decided. Thanks for the information, Jenkins. They prepared to depart. The second man turned back toward Caleb. One more thing. The woman had a bullet wound, left shoulder. In case you come across, remains. Caleb nodded solemnly. I'll remember that. He remained in place, watching as the two men made their way north along the ridge, following his false lead. Only when they had disappeared from view did he allow his shoulders to relax slightly. The encounter had gone as well as could be expected, but the revelation of multiple search parties changed everything. Isabella and Emma were in far greater danger than he had initially calculated. Even his isolated cabin might not remain hidden for long, especially if Bannister's men established a systematic search pattern. Returning to his trap lines, Caleb collected his harvested game and headed back toward the cabin with quickened steps. Plans that had been nebulous that morning now crystallized with urgent clarity. They could not wait for spring. As soon as Isabella was strong enough to travel, they would need to leave, not via the main pass where Bannister's men were concentrated, but through the treacherous northern route that only a handful of mountain men knew existed. It would be dangerous, especially with a baby, but remaining in the cabin had become the greater risk. As Caleb approached his hidden home, he caught sight of Isabella through the small window, her figure illuminated by firelight as she rocked Emma in her arms. The domestic scene stirred something in him that he had thought long dead, a protective instinct more powerful than his desire for isolation. For the first time in 15 years, Caleb Thorne found himself planning not for his own survival, but for others. And with that realization came the uncomfortable certainty that he could no longer remain untouched by the world he had abandoned. They know we survived. Isabella's voice remained steady as Caleb relayed his encounter with Bannister's men, though her arms tightened protectively around Emma. How did they track us this far? They didn't, Caleb replied, skinning a rabbit with practiced efficiency. They're searching the entire region, standard procedure when you want to be certain. And they'll find us eventually. It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded, his hands never pausing in their work. Multiple teams, systematic search pattern. Matter of time before someone spots signs of the cabin, despite my precautions. How much time? A week, maybe less. He glanced up at her, noting the determined set of her jaw. You well enough to travel? Isabella tested her injured shoulder with a tentative rotation. The pain had subsided to a dull ache, and the infection had cleared completely, thanks to Caleb's herbal knowledge. Yes, but the pass is not the main. Pass? Caleb interrupted, placing the dressed rabbit in his cookpot. There's another way, northern route through Thunder Canyon. Few know it exists. Is it dangerous? Caleb hesitated, then decided honesty was the only responsible choice. Yes, narrow trails, steep drops, avalanche risk. Normally I wouldn't consider it in winter, especially with a child. But it's our only option, Isabella concluded, gazing down at Emma, who was contently grasping at a wooden spoon Caleb had carved for her. How soon can we leave? 2 days. Need to prepare supplies, proper gear. Caleb wiped his hands on a cloth and moved to the corner of the cabin, pulling out a worn leather map case from beneath a floorboard. Journey will take a week if the weather holds. Need to be ready for longer. As he spread the map across his table, Isabella approached. Emma balanced on her hip. The faded parchment detailed the surrounding mountains with the precision of someone who had walked every ridge and valley personally, marking features that no official survey had ever documented. "You drew this," she observed, studying the careful notations and symbols. Caleb nodded, tracing a thin line that wound through a series of jagged peaks labeled simply Thunder. "This route leads to the Elk River. From there, it's 2 days to Fort Benton, your aunt's place." Isabella's finger followed the path, her expression somber as she gauged the difficulty from the tightly packed contour lines and notations like ice field and narrow ledge. Will Emma survive such a journey? The blunt question hung in the air between them. Caleb met her gaze directly. "I'll construct a carrying sling that will keep her warm against your body. Special design, used by mountain men's wives when they travel with infants." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be with you every step. If it becomes too dangerous, we'll find shelter and wait." The simple statement carried the weight of commitment that Caleb had avoided for 15 years. Isabella seemed to recognize this, for she studied his face with new intensity. "Why are you helping us, Mr. Thorne? You've gone to extraordinary lengths to live alone, yet you risk everything for strangers." Caleb turned away, uncomfortable with her directness. "Leaving you to die wouldn't sit right." "There's more to it than that," Isabella pressed gently. "I've seen how you watch the passes, how carefully you've hidden this place. You're not just someone who prefers solitude. You're hiding from something, or someone." Caleb's hands are still on the map. For a moment, Isabella thought she'd pushed too far, crossed some invisible boundary. Then, to her surprise, he moved to the hearth and pressed a hidden mechanism in the stonework. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a passageway. "Come," he said simply, lighting a lantern. Isabella followed him through the opening, which led to a chamber carved directly into the mountainside behind the cabin. As they entered, Caleb lit additional lanterns, illuminating what she recognized immediately as a master gunsmith's workshop. The space was immaculate, with specialized tools arranged on benches, racks of partially completed weapons, and detailed diagrams covering one wall. In the center stood a workbench with precision instruments Isabella had seen only in the finest manufacturing establishments back east. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, taking in the sophisticated equipment and obvious craftsmanship. Her eyes fell on a rifle displayed prominently on a rack, a weapon of such elegant design and perfect proportion that it seemed more art than instrument of death. Caleb watched her reaction with an unreadable expression. "Do you know the name Thorne?" Isabella's eyes widened as the connection formed. "Thorne Precision Rifles. My father had one. Said it was the finest weapon ever crafted." She looked at him with new understanding. "You're Caleb Thorne." "Caleb Thorne." He nodded once, his expression tightening. "Was. Your weapons were legendary. Then you disappeared." Her voice trailed off as she studied his face, noting the deep lines etched by more than just time. "Something happened. St. Louis, 1863. Caleb's voice was flat, emotionless. "Demonstration of a new rifle designed for Governor Hammond and military officials. Weapons malfunctioned. 5 men died, including the governor's son." Isabella gasped softly. "I remember my father speaking of it." "It was a scandal. It was murder," Caleb interrupted, his composure finally cracking. "The rifle had been sabotaged, main firing pin replaced with substandard metal that shattered on discharge, killed 2 men outright, blinded 3 more who later died of their wounds." "Sabotage? Was it proven?" "No. Investigation concluded it was a design flaw. My responsibility." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. I examined every component afterward, found microscopic file marks on the firing pin, deliberate weakening that would guarantee catastrophic failure. Who would do such a thing? Caleb's laugh held no humor. I had competitors. My designs were revolutionizing the industry. Patents, worth fortunes. He shook his head. Never discovered who, but after the funerals, the accusations, the families calling me murderer, I couldn't continue. Isabella absorbed this revelation, her eyes moving from Caleb to the workshop that represented both his genius and his prison. So you vanished, came here to hide. To atone, he corrected. I create, perfect, then dismantle. No more weapons. Bearing my name will ever kill again. The tragedy of it struck Isabella with unexpected force. This brilliant craftsman reducing himself to a hermit, denying the world his gifts out of guilt for deaths he hadn't caused. You were wronged, she said softly. Terribly wronged. Caleb turned away, uncomfortable with her sympathy. Happened a long time ago. Is that why you saved us? Because you couldn't save them? The question struck too close to truths Caleb had refused to acknowledge even to himself. He busied himself adjusting a tool on his workbench, but the tremor in his hands betrayed his emotion. Your husband stood against corruption, he said finally. Paid with his life. Same patterns, different players. He gestured toward the displayed rifle. Completed this the night after you arrived. First time in 15 years I haven't immediately dismantled my work. Isabella understood the significance of this admission. You made it to protect us, perhaps. Caleb closed the workbench drawer with finality. Or perhaps to remember that. Creation can defend as well as destroy. They returned to the main cabin in silence, Isabella processing the revelations about her rescuer, while Caleb appeared both relieved and discomfited by having shared his past. As Emma began to fuss, demanding attention, the practical concerns of their survival once again took precedence. We leave at dawn in 2 days, Caleb announced, returning to the map. I'll begin preparations immediately. You should rest as much as possible before then. Journey will test your endurance. Isabella nodded, but her expression had changed. Where before there had been gratitude and determination, now there was also understanding, and a subtle shift in how she regarded him. No longer just her mysterious rescuer, but a man whose broken past had unexpected parallels to her own shattered present. The next 48 hours transformed the cabin into a hive of activity. Caleb worked with single-minded focus, preparing equipment for their journey. He constructed the promised carrying sling for Emma, using soft deerskin lined with rabbit fur, designed to distribute weight evenly across Isabella's uninjured shoulder while keeping the baby warm against her body. Food supplies were carefully calculated and packed. Pemmican made from dried venison and rendered fat, hardtack biscuits, dried berries and tea. Each item was selected for maximum nutrition and minimal weight. For Isabella, he modified a pair of his winter boots to fit her smaller feet, adding extra fur lining and reinforcing the soles for the treacherous terrain ahead. He fashioned snowshoes. For both of them, the designs different. His larger and optimized for breaking trail, hers lighter and adapted for following in his tracks. Most significant was his decision regarding weapons. From his workshop, he brought out not only the newly completed rifle, but also a lightweight pistol of his own design, with an innovative loading mechanism that allowed for rapid fire without sacrificing accuracy. You know how to shoot? He asked Isabella, demonstrating the pistol's action. My father taught me. I'm adequate, not an expert. Caleb nodded. This design has minimal recoil, won't strain your injured shoulder. He handed her the weapon, watching as she tested its weight and balance with competent hands. Practice the loading sequence until it becomes instinct. As Isabella familiarized herself with the pistol, Caleb made his final preparations, including setting false trails that would lead any searchers away from their actual route. He showed Isabella the map repeatedly, ensuring she memorized key landmarks and potential shelter points along their journey, a precaution that remained unspoken. If something happened to him, she would need to continue alone. On the evening, before their departure, as Emma slept peacefully in her improvised cradle, Caleb and Isabella sat by the fire, the weight of their impending journey hanging between them. "Thank you," Isabella said simply, breaking the lengthy silence, "not just for saving us, but for risking everything to help us reach safety." Caleb nodded once, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Northern route is the best chance. Stay close behind. Me step exactly where I step. Canyon winds can be deceptive. Listen to my signals, not your instincts." "I understand." She hesitated, then added, "What will you do after we reach Fort Benton?" The question caught him unprepared. In his focused planning for their journey, Caleb had given little thought to what would follow: return to his solitude, continue his self-imposed exile. For the first time in 15 years, those prospects seemed less like sanctuary and more like sentences. "Don't know," he finally admitted. "Haven't planned that far." Isabella studied him by the firelight, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps you don't need to decide yet. Perhaps the journey itself will provide the answer." As night deepened around the hidden cabin, Caleb found himself considering possibilities he had long ago abandoned: a life beyond isolation, purpose beyond atonement. Whether these thoughts were folly or foresight remained to be seen, but as he made his final checks of their equipment, he acknowledged a truth he had been avoiding. In saving Isabella and Emma, he had already irrevocably changed his path. Whatever lay ahead, there would be no returning to the life he had known before they arrived. Dawn broke with bitter clarity over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pink and gold that belied the deadly cold. Caleb stood outside his cabin, studying the sky with the intensity of a man whose survival had long depended on reading nature's signals. "Storm building to the west," he noted, as Isabella joined him, Emma securely fastened in the carrier against her chest. 3 days out, maybe 4. Need to be through the canyon before it hits." Isabella nodded, adjusting her pack with her good arm. The weight was substantial, but carefully balanced, Caleb having distributed the essentials between their packs, according to what her injured shoulder could tolerate. "We'll make it," she said with quiet determination. Caleb gave her a measuring look. In the 2 weeks since he'd found her half dead in the snow, Isabella Morgan had revealed a core of resilience that continually surprised him. The society woman's manners and education remained, but beneath them lay a frontier spirit that hardship had tempered rather than broken. "Stay directly behind me," he reminded her, shouldering his own much heavier pack and the rifle. "Step only where I step." With a final glance at the cabin that had been his sanctuary for 15 years, Caleb moved out, breaking trail through the fresh snow toward the northern ridge. He didn't look back, a practical choice, focusing only on what lay ahead. But Isabella turned once, memorizing the small structure nestled against the mountainside, nearly invisible even from just 100 yards away. "Your father built this place well," she commented, as they climbed steadily through the pine forest. "I would have passed it by without noticing." "Wasn't my father," Caleb replied, his breathing measured despite the steep ascent. "Built it myself. Took 3 summers. Isabella's surprise was evident. Alone, without help. Easiest way to ensure no one knows it exists." The conversation lapsed as the climb intensified, requiring their full concentration. Caleb set a deliberate pace, mindful of Isabella's condition and the precious cargo she carried. Emma, remarkably, seemed to enjoy the journey, her dark eyes taking in the snow-laden branches and dappled sunlight with apparent fascination. By midday, they had reached the first significant landmark, a natural formation Caleb had marked on his map as Sentinel Rock, a towering spire of granite that marked the entrance to the maze of ridges leading to Thunder Canyon. Here they paused briefly, Caleb scanning the valley below for any sign of pursuit, while Isabella nursed Emma. No tracks following, he noted with satisfaction. False trails worked, at least for now. "How far is the canyon?" Isabella asked, bundling Emma back into the carrier. 3 miles as the crow flies. Longer for us. Need to follow the ridgeline." Caleb pointed to a barely perceptible path cutting across the steep slope ahead. "Gets narrow in parts. Watch your footing." The afternoon brought the first real test of Isabella's determination. The trail Caleb followed, visible only to his experienced eyes, clung to sheer rock faces in places, offering a precarious passage above dizzying drops. In the most treacherous sections, he improvised a safety system, securing a rope between them as they navigated icy ledges barely wide enough for a single footprint. Isabella followed his instructions with precise obedience, placing her feet exactly where he indicated, never looking down at the hundreds of feet of empty air below them. Emma, perhaps sensing the danger, remained unusually quiet, her tiny fists clutching the edge of the fur-lined carrier. As the short winter day began to wane, they reached a small plateau where stunted pines provided some shelter from the constant wind. Caleb immediately set about establishing camp, creating a snow cave rather than setting up the small tent he carried. "Better protection," he explained, hollowing out the packed snowdrift with practiced efficiency. "Warmer, harder to spot." From a distance, Isabella watched his methodical work with admiration. Every movement served a purpose. Every decision balanced immediate needs against potential threats. In another life, another time, Caleb Thorne had been an artisan whose creations were coveted by wealthy collectors. Now he applied that same precision to the art of wilderness survival, with their lives as his masterpiece. The completed snow shelter was surprisingly comfortable, insulated from the bitter wind, body heat retained by the curved walls, and a small entrance that Caleb partially sealed once they were inside. He allowed a tiny fire in a specialized metal container of his own design, just enough to heat water for tea and warm their rations without creating visible smoke. As they ate their simple meal, Emma drifted to sleep between them, exhausted by the day's journey yet remarkably content. Isabella stroked her daughter's cheek gently, her expression softening. "She's extraordinarily resilient," Caleb observed, his voice low to avoid disturbing the sleeping infant. "Most children her age would be screaming bloody murder by now." Isabella smiled. "Daniel always said she had an old soul. Even as a newborn, she seemed to understand more than she should." Her smile faded at the mention of her husband. "He would be grateful to you for what you're doing for us." Caleb shook his head slightly, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Your husband stood on principle, paid the price for it." He hesitated, then added, "Respected men like that once, before St. Louis. And now I respect them more, understand the cost better." He stared into the tiny flame. "Principles are easy until they're tested." Isabella studied him in the flickering light. "Is that why you became a recluse? Because your principles were tested?" "Became a recluse because I failed the test." Caleb's voice had an edge of bitterness. "Should have investigated the sabotage myself, found who was responsible. Instead, I ran. Hide. You were grieving, traumatized. I was a coward," he corrected harshly. "Men died because of my work. I owed them justice. Instead, I chose oblivion." Isabella was quiet for a moment, weighing her response. "Perhaps," she finally said, "this journey is an opportunity to balance that scale." Caleb looked up sharply, something in her tone catching his attention. "You believe in redemption. I believe in second chances." She met his gaze steadily. "For both of us." The simple statement hung between them, carrying implications neither was prepared to examine further. After a moment, Caleb nodded toward the snow cave's entrance. "Should get some rest. Dawn comes early. Long day tomorrow. We enter Thunder Canyon proper." Sleep came fitfully to Caleb that night. His dreams, haunted by faces from St. Louis, mingled with new fears. Isabella and Emma falling from ice-slick ledges, Bannister's men emerging from blizzard conditions with rifles raised. He woke repeatedly, checking the entrance for any sign of threat, listening to the wind's changing tenor for warnings of weather shifts. Each time, his eyes were drawn to Isabella and Emma, sleeping peacefully side by side, their breath forming small clouds in the sea, frigid air. Their trust in him was both a burden and blessing, a responsibility he had not sought but could no longer deny. Dawn brought clearing skies but plunging temperatures, cold so intense it stole breath and froze eyelashes. Caleb studied the conditions with concern as they broke camp. Temperature drop means pressure change. Storm might come faster than I calculated. He glanced at Isabella. "Need to push hard today. Make it through the canyon's narrows before dark." Isabella nodded, securing Emma in her carrier with an extra layer of protection against the brutal cold. "We're ready." Their second day's journey led them into the heart of what Caleb had named Thunder Canyon on his map, a winding chasm with towering walls that trapped and amplified sound, making even whispers echo ominously. The path, barely worthy of the name, alternated between treacherously narrow ledges and steep descents requiring the rope Caleb had brought for such purposes. By midday, they had reached the canyon floor, where a frozen stream created a more level path forward, though the ice required careful testing with each step to avoid hidden weak spots. The massive walls, rising 1,000 feet on either side, blocked direct sunlight, casting them in permanent twilight despite the clear sky above. "Why is it called Thunder Canyon?" Isabella asked, her voice hushed in the oppressive silence. "You'll see if the storm hits while we're here," Caleb replied grimly. "Sound bounces between the walls, turns ordinary thunder into something that feels like the end of the world." They pressed on, making good progress along the frozen streambed. Occasionally, Caleb would halt abruptly, holding up a hand for silence as he listened intently. But each time he eventually shook his head and continued, offering no explanation for his caution. It was during one such pause, as Isabella adjusted Emma's coverings, that she noticed Caleb's sudden tension. Not the alert wariness of before, but something more urgent. Following his gaze upward, she saw nothing unusual in the towering cliff faces. "What is it?" she whispered. "Rockslide damage ahead." He pointed to a section of the canyon where a massive collapse had occurred, relatively recently judging by the sharp edges of the debris. "Path I knew is gone." Isabella studied the obstacle with growing concern. The slide had completely blocked the canyon floor, creating a chaotic jumble of boulders, ranging from the size of wagons to small houses. Scaling it directly seemed impossible, especially with an infant. "Is there another way?" Caleb scanned the canyon walls, searching for alternatives. After a long moment, he indicated a narrow ledge that skirted the rock slide along the eastern wall. That might connect to the path beyond. Tight passage, but possible. They approached the ledge carefully. It was narrower than anything they had traversed so far, in places barely 6 inches wide, with a sheer drop of 40 feet to the jagged rocks below. Worse, in several sections, the surface appeared slick with ice. Caleb tested the beginning of the ledge, applying his weight gradually while maintaining handholds on the rough stone wall. "Solid enough here," he determined, then turned to Isabella with grave seriousness. "This is the most dangerous section yet. If you're not comfortable, we need to continue," Isabella interrupted, her resolve evident. I'll follow your lead." With careful precision, Caleb showed her how to press her body against the canyon wall, maximizing contact with the stable surface while testing each foothold before committing her weight. They secured Emma's carrier with additional straps, ensuring the baby was protected against the rock face rather than exposed to the drop. Inch by inch, they made their way along the treacherous ledge, communication reduced to terse instructions. "Hold here. Test that spot. Wait until I'm secure." Emma, perhaps sensing the danger, remained absolutely still in her carrier, her eyes wide but unexpectedly calm. They had progressed perhaps halfway around the rockslide when disaster nearly struck. A section of the ledge, weakened by freeze-thaw, cycles, crumbled beneath Isabella's foot just as she was transferring her weight. With a cry of alarm, she began to pitch backward toward the void. Caleb's reaction was instantaneous. His hand shot out, catching her arm in an iron grip, while his other hand maintained a secure hold on a rocky protrusion. For a terrifying moment, Isabella dangled over the drop, Emma secured against her chest, both their lives hanging literally by Caleb's grip. With a grunt of effort, he pulled her back toward the wall, guiding her free hand to a solid handhold. "I've got you," he said, his voice remarkably steady despite the strain. "You're secure now. Breathe." Isabella's face had gone chalk white, but she followed his instructions, finding her footing once more on the narrow ledge. Emma, miraculously, had not cried out, though her tiny fingers clutched the edge of her carrier with surprising strength. "Thank you," Isabella whispered when she could speak again. Caleb merely nodded, his eyes scanning the remaining route with new wariness. "Going to secure a rope between us for the rest of this section. No more chances." With the added security of the rope, they completed the passage around the rock slide without further incident, emerging onto a wider section of the canyon floor where the path continued relatively unobstructed. By late afternoon, they had reached the point Caleb had identified as their second night's shelter, a shallow cave in the western wall, invisible until you were almost upon it. As Isabella settled Emma inside the natural shelter, Caleb remained at the entrance, studying the sky, visible in the narrow strip above the canyon walls. The clouds he had predicted were now clearly visible, building and darkening with ominous speed. Storms accelerated, he noted, his expression grim. "Hit by midday tomorrow, I'd guess. Need to be through the canyon's far end before then." "Is that possible?" Isabella asked, noting the weariness in his features that he tried to conceal. Caleb calculated distances and their pace thus far. "If we start at first light, push hard." He met her eyes directly. "It'll be difficult." Isabella glanced down at Emma, now sleeping peacefully after nursing. "We've come too far to turn back," she said simply. "We'll make it." As they settled in for the night, the wind beginning to moan in the upper reaches of the canyon, Caleb found himself studying Isabella with growing admiration. The society woman he had initially judged as out of her element had proven to be a survivor in the truest sense, not merely enduring but adapting, meeting each challenge with quiet courage. More unsettling was his realization that his concern for her and Emma had become more than obligation or duty. Somewhere between the cabin and this hidden cave, the wall he had built around himself had begun to crumble, just as surely as the ledge beneath Isabella's foot. Whether that development represented strength or weakness remained to be seen, but as the first distant rumble of thunder reached them, the sound that gave the canyon its name, Caleb acknowledged that whatever awaited them beyond this journey, he would not be returning to the isolated existence he had known before. They awoke to a world transformed. Overnight, the temperature had risen dramatically, bringing with it a thick, disorienting fog that filled the canyon like spectral soup. The sudden warmth, unusual for Montana's winter mountains, was not a blessing, but a warning. Chinook wind, Caleb explained as they hurriedly broke camp. Warm air mass from the west brings rapid thaw, then freezing rain, then blizzard. He studied the fog-shrouded canyon with evident concern. Changes everything. Timeline compressed. Isabella secured. Emma, who fussed slightly at the rushed preparations. How much time do we have? Hours, not days. Caleb shouldered his pack. Need to reach the northern exit before the storm properly hits. After that, the canyon becomes a death trap. Flash floods from snowmelt, then ice. They set out at a grueling pace, the fog limiting visibility to mere yards ahead. Caleb navigated not by sight, but by memory and touch, his hand frequently brushing the canyon wall for orientation. The sound of dripping echoed around them as the abnormal warmth triggered 1,000 miniature waterfalls from melting snow and... "Haste, faster!" Caleb urged after they paused briefly to adjust Emma's coverings. "Listen." Isabella strained her ears, at first hearing nothing beyond the constant dripping. Then she caught it, a distant rumble, different from thunder, continuous rather than intermittent. "What is that?" "Snowmelt converging upstream," Caleb replied grimly. "Canyon's natural drainage channel. That sound means water's building behind. Ice dams. When they break..." He didn't need to finish. The implication was clear. When those natural dams failed, a wall of water would surge through the canyon, sweeping away everything in its path. They pressed on through the disorientating fog, the sound growing steadily louder. The relatively level stream bed they had followed previously now became treacherously slick, the ice layer melting unevenly, creating hidden pools and treacherous footing. Twice Isabella slipped, saved from falling only by Caleb's quick reflexes, and the rope that now permanently secured them together. By mid-morning, the fog began to lift, not through dispersal, but by rising above them as warmer air continued to flow into the canyon. The improved visibility revealed a disturbing sight. The formerly frozen stream was now actively flowing in places, and fresh water trickled down the canyon walls from rapidly melting snow above. "Not good," Caleb muttered, scanning the path. Ahead, where the canyon narrowed significantly, "Water's rising faster than I expected." A sudden crack split the air, sharp, violent, and close. Both froze, instinctively looking up toward the sound source. "Ice dam breaking," Caleb identified, his expression grim. "We need to gain elevation. Now!" Without further explanation, he led Isabella toward the canyon wall, seeking a route upward. The smooth rock faces offered few obvious handholds, but Caleb's experienced eye found a potential path. A series of ledges and cracks that might allow them to climb 50 feet above the canyon floor. "Can you manage it?" he asked, eyeing Emma. In her carrier, Isabella nodded, determination overriding fear. "Show me where to climb." Caleb went first, testing each handhold before instructing Isabella where to place her hands and feet. The climbing was arduous, especially with her injured shoulder and the additional weight of Emma, but the rising sound of rushing water below provided urgent motivation. They had ascended perhaps 30 feet when the first surge hit. The noise intensified from rumble to roar as a chest-high wave of icy water and debris thundered around the bend behind them, slamming into the canyon walls with terrifying force. Spray reached them even at their elevation, the cold droplets a stark reminder of how close they had come to being caught in the deluge. "Keep climbing," Caleb urged, reaching down to provide additional support as Isabella navigated a particularly difficult section. By the time they reached the relative safety of a wide ledge 50 feet above the canyon floor, the water below had transformed the peaceful streambed into a raging torrent. Tree trunks and massive ice chunks tumbled in the flow, colliding with the canyon walls, with bone-jarring impacts. "We wait here," Caleb decided, securing their position with the rope. "Initial surge will pass. Water level will stabilize temporarily. Before the main storm hits, Isabella settled against the rock face, adjusting Emma's position to nurse her. The baby had remained remarkably calm throughout the climb, her dark eyes watching the proceedings with that same unnerving focus. "She's extraordinary," Caleb remarked, not for the first time. "Most infants would be screaming." "She understands," Isabella replied simply. "Somehow she always has." She stroked Emma's wispy hair as the baby nursed contentedly, seemingly untroubled by their precarious position. Daniel used to say she was born with an old soul. Caleb studied them both, this remarkable mother and child who had disrupted his carefully isolated existence and now risked everything on his ability to guide them to safety. The weight of that responsibility settled deeper with each passing hour. "Rest while you can," he advised. "Once the water recedes enough to be passable, we'll need to move quickly. Canyon narrows ahead, higher ground, but tighter passage." As they waited, nature's violence played out below them. Water surging in waves as distant ice dams collapsed in sequence, debris building temporary barriers only to be swept away when pressure built sufficiently. The constant thunder of it echoed against the canyon walls, creating a cacophony that made conversation difficult. After nearly 2 hours, the flow began to diminish, the water level dropping as the initial snowmelt surge worked its way through. The canyon system, though still dangerous, the stream had receded enough to expose portions of the original path along the edges. "Time to move," Caleb announced, gathering their gear. "Storm's building. Can feel the pressure dropping." Indeed, the strange warmth that had triggered the melt was already dissipating, replaced by a heavy stillness that experienced mountain men recognized as the precursor to violent weather. Above them, the strip of visible sky had darkened ominously. Descending proved more challenging than the climb up, particularly with the rocks now slick with spray and beginning to refreeze as temperatures dropped. Caleb went first, creating secure footholds that Isabella could follow, the rope between them, their lifeline against disaster. Back on the canyon floor, they made rapid progress despite the treacherous conditions, Caleb selecting their path with the precision of someone who understood both water's destructive power and ice's deceptive nature. The canyon walls gradually narrowed, in places squeezing to barely 10 feet apart, intensifying both the water's force and the echoing thunder of its passage. They had traveled perhaps a mile through this claustrophobic section when Caleb suddenly halted, raising a hand for silence. Isabella froze, immediately alert to the change in his demeanor. "What is it?" she whispered, barely audible above the water's constant roar. Caleb didn't answer immediately, his head cocked slightly as he listened to something beyond the natural tumult. After a moment, his expression hardened. "Voices," he said finally, "echoing down from above. Men's voices." Isabella's blood ran cold. "Bannister's men, how could they find us here?" "Canyon has other access points, hunting trails down from the ridges," Caleb calculated rapidly. "If they've been searching systematically, and someone knows these mountains well enough." The implications hung between them. Their carefully chosen escape route, meant to avoid detection, had intersected with their pursuer's search pattern. How far behind? Hard to tell with the echoes. Half-mile, maybe less. Caleb scanned their surroundings with new urgency. Need to move faster but carefully. One mistake here. He didn't need to finish. They pressed on, now balancing speed against caution, each step a calculation of risk. The canyon began to widen slightly as they approached its northern exit, but the path became more complicated. Massive boulders creating obstacles, sections where the water had undercut the walls, forcing them to wade through frigid, knee-deep currents. The first gunshot came without warning, a sharp crack that momentarily outvoices even the water's roar. The bullet struck rock 10 feet above their heads, sending fragments spinning down around them. "Down!" Caleb commanded, pulling Isabella behind a boulder as a second shot followed the first. "They've spotted us." Isabella clutched Emma protectively, the baby remarkably silent, despite the sudden violence. "How many?" "Can't tell." Caleb peered cautiously around their shelter, assessing both the threat behind and the path ahead. At least 2, maybe more, on the eastern ridge. They have the high ground. Another shot struck their boulder, the impact sending vibrations through the stone. The message was clear. They were pinned down, with limited cover and a narrowing window of escape before the storm hit in full force. Caleb made a swift decision. Slipping his pack off, he extracted the rifle he had crafted specifically for this journey, the weapon he had completed the night Isabella arrived. The first he hadn't immediately dismantled in 15 years. "Stay here," he instructed, checking the rifle's loading mechanism with practiced hands. "When I give the signal, move to that outcropping." He indicated a sheltered position 30 yards ahead. "Don't wait for me. Don't look back. Just go." "What are you planning?" Isabella asked, reading his expression with growing alarm. "Creating a diversion." Caleb's voice was calm, his movements precise as he prepared the rifle. "They have a position, but not expertise. I doubt they've ever faced anyone who can make a 1,000-yard shot in canyon winds." Isabella grasped his arm. "Caleb." It was the first time she had used his given name. "Don't sacrifice yourself for us." Something shifted in his weathered face, a softening around the eyes, a subtle change that acknowledged boundaries crossed and distances closed. "Not planning to die today," he assured her. "Planning to remind myself what my skills were meant for." Before she could respond, Caleb moved, with surprising agility, to a position behind a smaller boulder, angling for a sightline up to the canyon rim. The movement drew immediate fire, 3 shots in rapid succession, striking rock around him, but finding no target. In the momentary pause that followed, Caleb raised his rifle, took aim with the steady hands that had once made him famous, and fired once. The shot echoed against the canyon walls, multiplying into a rolling cannonade of sound. A cry of pain followed, then shouted confusion from above. "Now!" Caleb called Isabella. "Move!" She obeyed instantly, clutching Emma to her chest as she dashed toward the outcropping he had indicated. Behind her, Caleb fired twice more in rapid succession, the precision weapon's report surprisingly muted compared to their pursuers' louder firearms. Reaching the shelter of the rock formation, Isabella pressed her back against stone, breathing heavily. Seconds later, Caleb joined her, his movement so fluid it seemed he simply materialized at her side. "Hit 2, he reported matter-of-factly. "Not killing shots, shoulder, leg. Third man pulled back. They'll be more cautious now." "They'll still follow," Isabella noted, recognizing the determination of men paid to complete a task regardless of obstacles. "Yes, but slower, more cautiously." Caleb nodded toward the canyon's exit, now visible in the distance. "Gives us time to reach the northern drainage. After that, the coming storm works in our favor." As if summoned by his words, the first true thunderclap of the approaching tempest rolled across the sky, amplified by the canyon walls into something primeval and terrifying. Drops of rain, massive and icy, began to fall, striking the rocks around them with audible impacts. "Storms here," Caleb observed grimly. "We need to reach higher ground before the second flood surge." Together they pushed forward, racing against both human pursuers and nature's escalating fury, their path illuminated by flashes of lightning that transformed the canyon into a chaotic dreamscape of shadow and brilliant light. Behind them, banisters. Men faced a critical decision: continue pursuit into increasingly dangerous conditions, or retreat to safer ground and risk losing their quarry. The wounded men's conditions and the menacing storm combined to tilt their calculation toward temporary withdrawal. For Caleb and Isabella, however, there was only forward motion, each step bringing them closer to the canyon's exit and the relative safety beyond, each flash of lightning revealing the narrow margin between survival and catastrophe. As they finally reached the canyon's northern mouth, where the walls fell away to reveal a broader valley beyond, the storm unleashed its full fury. Rain transformed to sleet, then to driving snow, the temperature plummeting as rapidly as it had risen hours earlier. "Shelter!" Caleb shouted above the wind's howl, pointing toward a stand of dense pines on higher ground. "Need to establish position before visibility goes completely." Isabella nodded, beyond speech, her energy focused entirely on moving forward through the intensifying blizzard, protecting Emma from the cutting ice particles that seemed to strike from all directions at once. They reached the pines as darkness fell, the storm creating a premature night that obliterated landscape and direction. Caleb worked quickly, constructing a shelter more sophisticated than their previous night's snow cave, a lean-to that utilized both natural and improvised materials, positioned to block the wind while remaining difficult to spot from a distance. Inside this rough haven, as sleet hammered against pine boughs above them and wind howled like a living entity, Isabella finally allowed herself to check Emma thoroughly. The baby was cold, but not dangerously so, the specialized carrier having protected her from the worst of the elements. "She's all right," Isabella reported with palpable relief. "Somehow, through all of it, she's all right." Caleb nodded, his attention divided between their immediate needs and the constant vigilance that had kept them alive thus far. He prepared a small, nearly smokeless fire using materials from his pack, its heat barely sufficient, but better than nothing in the face of plummeting temperatures. "We've lost them for now," he assessed, listening to the storm's violence. "No, one travels in this, not even men like those." He met Isabella's exhausted gaze across the tiny flame. "But they'll resume searching when the weather clears. How far is Fort Benton now?" Isabella asked, cradling Emma close for shared warmth. 3 days, in good conditions. More on this. Caleb's expression remained unreadable in the flickering light. "Decision point tomorrow. Continue north as planned, or attempt to circle back east towards smaller settlements." The choice represented more than mere direction. It was a question of strategy. Continue their original path, potentially into a net of searchers, or attempt a new route that might avoid Bannister's men, but presents its own dangers. "You've saved our lives multiple times today," Isabella said after a long silence. "The ledge, the flood, the ambush." She looked down at Emma, now sleeping despite the storm's constant roar. "I don't know how to thank you." Caleb's response was unexpected, not dismissal of her gratitude as before, but thoughtful consideration. 15 years, he said finally. 15 years hiding from what happened in St. Louis, building guns no one would use, perfecting skills no one would benefit from. His eyes met hers with surprising intensity. "Today I used those skills to protect, not harm. That's enough thanks." In that moment, as the storm raged around their fragile shelter and danger still pursued them, something fundamental shifted between them, an acknowledgement of connection that transcended their circumstances, a recognition that whatever lay ahead, they would face it not as strangers thrown together by fate, but as something more. What that more might become remained unspoken, deferred by necessity to a future neither could yet envision. For now, survival demanded their full attention. Yet as they settled into uneasy rest, alert for any change in the storm or approach of enemies, both recognized that the journey had irreversibly altered them. Caleb emerging from his self-imposed isolation, Isabella finding strength she hadn't, known she possessed, and between them Emma slept peacefully, one tiny hand curled around Caleb's finger, the other clutching her mother's shawl, a living bridge between past and future, loss and possibility. Dawn broke with deceptive gentleness. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape, pristine white drifts sculpting the terrain into unfamiliar contours, trees bowing under their crystal burden, the air so clear it seemed to magnify distance rather than diminish it. Caleb emerged from their shelter first, rifle ready, eyes scanning for any movement across the vast white canvas before him. After confirming they were alone, at least for the moment, he turned his attention to more immediate concerns, determining their exact position and plotting their next move. The storm had disoriented even his experienced sense of direction, forcing him to climb a nearby pine to sight familiar landmarks above the snow-filled valley. What he observed caused a reassessment of their situation. "Problem?" Isabella asked when he returned, reading his expression as she prepared Emma for the day's journey. "Storm was stronger than anticipated," Caleb replied, unfurling his map on a flat rock now cleared of snow. "Pushed us further east than I intended. We're here." His finger indicated a position that made Isabella frown. "That's not on our planned route." "No. Flood and pursuit forced us off course." He studied the map with focused intensity. "Change our options." Isabella joined him. Emma secured her career. "How so?" Original plan was to continue north, reach Elk River, then follow it to settlements near Fort Benton. Caleb traced this route on the map. "Direct but exposed. Bannister's men know we survived now. They'll concentrate search efforts along that approach. So we need an alternative." Caleb nodded, his finger moving to indicate a different path. "Eastern route. Longer. More. Difficult terrain initially, but leads through this area." He tapped a section marked with minimal detail. "Blackfeet calls it Hidden Valley. Few white men know it exists." "And you're one of them," Isabella observed. A ghost of a smile touched Caleb's lips. "Spent my first winter in these mountains there. Old Blackfoot hunter named Two Hawks showed me the way when I was half dead from exposure. Said I wasn't ready to die yet, had purpose unfulfilled." It was the most personal information he had volunteered about his years in the wilderness, a small but significant relaxation of the barriers he had maintained between them. "This valley," Isabella prompted, recognizing the importance of the moment. "Without drawing attention to it, does it offer protection? Natural fortress, single entrance from this side, steep cliffs on all others. Good hunting, hidden spring that never freezes." Caleb refolded the map with decisive movements. "More importantly, not on any white man's charts. Bannister's trackers won't know to look there." "How far?" 2 days. Rough going at first through that pass." He indicated a narrow defile between towering peaks ahead. "After that, it's easier to travel to the valley." As they broke camp and prepared to move out, Caleb's vigilance increased rather than diminished. The clear conditions that made travel easier also made them more visible to pursuers. Every ridgeline might conceal watchers. Every pristine snowfield potentially records their passing. To counter this, Caleb led them on an unpredictable path, sometimes backtracking, occasionally creating false trails that branched from their actual route, frequently using frozen stream beds where water would eventually erase their tracks. These precautions slowed their progress, but significantly reduced the chance of pursuit. By midday, they had reached the entrance to the pass Caleb had indicated, a forbidding slash between sheer mountain faces that appeared impassable to Isabella's untrained eye. Wind howled through the narrow opening, creating sculpted snow formations and bare patches of ice-slick stone. "We're going through that?" she asked, unable to keep the doubt from her voice. "Looks worse than it is," Caleb assured her, though his expression remained serious. "Stay close. Step exactly where I step. Situations different from the canyon, less water danger, more avalanche risk. He fashioned improvised gaiters for both of them from materials in his pack, protection against the deeper snow they would encounter. For the rifle, he created a specialized covering that would keep the firing mechanism dry while allowing quick access if needed. These preparations complete, they entered the pass, immediately enveloped by shadow as the towering walls blocked direct sunlight. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the wind's moan transformed to an eerie whistle as it squeezed through the narrow space. Progress was painfully slow. In some sections, the path was barely wide enough for single-file passage. In others, completely obscured by snowdrifts, requiring careful probing before each step. Caleb remained hyper-aware of the snowpack above them, eyes frequently scanning the slopes for any sign of instability. "Voice down," he cautioned when Isabella began to speak. "Sound carries, can trigger slides." They continued in silence after that communication reduced to hand signals and the occasional whispered instruction. Emma, seemingly attuned to the danger, maintained her extraordinary quiet, dark eyes, taking in the ice-clad walls, rising hundreds of feet above them. The afternoon brought their first serious challenge, a section where a previous avalanche had completely filled the pass with a chaotic jumble of snow, rock, and shattered pine trees. No clear path remained. They would need to climb over the massive debris field. "Dangerous," Caleb acknowledged, studying the obstacle. "Unstable surface, new slide risk." He glanced at Isabella. "Alternative is turning back, taking the northern route with its own risks." Isabella assessed the barrier, then looked down at Emma. The decision balanced immediate danger against the longer-term threat of Bannister's men. After a moment's consideration, she nodded firmly. "We continue. I trust your judgment." Those simple words carried weight beyond their immediate circumstances, an acknowledgement of faith that extended beyond wilderness skills to the man himself. Caleb accepted both the responsibility and the implicit trust with a single nod. "Stay roped to me. Test each foothold before committing your weight. If anything shifts, freeze in place until I secure you." The crossing became a lesson in patience and precision. Each step required testing, each handhold careful evaluation. The debris field creaked and settled beneath them, occasional sharp reports of shifting wood or stone, freezing them in place until the danger of a secondary slide passed. Halfway across, disaster nearly struck. A seemingly solid pine trunk, Isabella, used for support, suddenly gave way, collapsing into the snow with a muffled thump. The movement triggered a chain reaction, snow shifting, smaller debris rolling away, the entire section beginning a slow slide downward. "Don't move!" Caleb's command cut through her instinctive panic. He was already driving his ice axe deep into more stable material nearby, securing their rope to create an anchor point. "Lean toward me, slowly." Isabella obeyed, fighting against the natural urge to scramble away from the collapsing section. With measured movements, she shifted her weight as directed, allowing Caleb to gradually pull her toward more solid footing. Emma, remarkably, remained silent throughout the ordeal, her tiny body pressed against her mother's chest. When they finally reached stable ground, Isabella's legs trembled with both exertion and delayed fear. "That was too close," she whispered. "But you handled it perfectly," Caleb noted, genuine admiration in his voice. "Most people panic. You didn't." The compliment steadied her more effectively than any physical support. They continued across the remainder of the avalanche field with renewed focus, finally reaching the far side as the short winter day began to wane. "Need to make camp soon," Caleb observed, studying the shadows lengthening across their path. "Another mile if possible. Pass narrows ahead, more defensible position." They pressed on, fatigue beginning to take its toll on Isabella despite her determination. The combination of stress, physical exertion, and the constant vigilance required in such terrain tested the limits of her endurance. Only Emma's presence and the absolute necessity of reaching safety kept her moving forward. Caleb noticed her flagging strength without comment, subtly adjusting their pace and finding reasons to call brief halts that allowed her to rest without acknowledging weakness. His respect for her determination grew with each challenging section she conquered. As twilight descended, they reached the spot Caleb had identified for their night camp, a natural alcove where the pass briefly widened before narrowing again. Massive boulders provided shelter from the wind and concealment from any observers above. Setting up camp became a well-practiced routine, their movements coordinated without need for discussion. Isabella cared for Emma, while Caleb established their shelter, tonight a more substantial structure using the natural rock formations augmented with pine boughs and his tarp. Warmer than last night, he noted as they settled inside. Pass blocks the worst of the wind, should reach the valley by tomorrow evening if the weather holds. And what then? Isabella asked, the question encompassing far more than their immediate travel plans. Caleb was silent for a moment, poking at their small concealed fire with a stick. Valley gives us breathing room. Time to plan the next phase. From there, multiple routes to settlements where your aunt might be found. That wasn't my question, Isabella said softly. Caleb looked up, meeting her gaze across the flickering light. The barriers that had kept him isolated for 15 years had eroded steadily throughout their journey, worn away by shared danger and growing connection. Now, facing her direct inquiry, he found himself unable to maintain the emotional distance he had cultivated for so long. Don't know, he finally admitted. 15 years of certainty, knowing exactly what each day would bring, what purpose it served, all gone since you arrived. There was no accusation in his tone, merely acknowledgement of fundamental change. Do you regret helping us? Isabella's question carried no expectation, only a desire to understand. No. The response came without hesitation, surprising even Caleb with its certainty. Should regret the disruption, the danger, the loss of everything. I built, but I don't. Emma stirred between them, making soft noises that drew both their attention. Isabella adjusted her position, checking that she was warm enough in the rapidly cooling night air. She likes you, Isabella observed, as Emma's tiny hand reached toward Caleb. She doesn't talk to people easily. Good judge of character, Caleb replied, allowing the infant to grasp his finger. The simple contact, this tiny hand wrapped trustingly around his calloused digit, affected him more deeply than he could express. When we reach Fort Benton, Isabella began carefully, would you consider... A sharp crack from somewhere up the pass interrupted her, the sound distinct from natural. Mountain noises, both instantly tensed, Caleb already reaching for his rifle. How far? Isabella whispered, instinctively pulling Emma closer. Quarter mile, maybe less, Caleb estimated, moving to the shelter's entrance. Single report. Rifle, not handgun. He listened intently, scanning what little he could see of the darkening pass. Could be a hunter, could be a search party. Another shot echoed, followed by faint voices carried in the evening air, too distant to discern words, but clearly human, communication rather than animal sounds. Too late to move, Caleb decided, returning to Isabella's side. Our position's well concealed. Best strategy is to remain silent, no light, no movement. He extinguished their small fire, plunging the shelter into darkness relieved only by the faint starlight filtering through gaps in the construction. In the newfound blackness, Isabella felt, rather than saw him position himself protectively at the entrance, rifle ready. Will they find us? She whispered, the question barely audible. Not. If they're ordinary searchers, Caleb replied with grim certainty. But if they have the tracker, I think they might. A man called Redfeather, half-crow, trained by the army, our precautions may not be sufficient. The night deepened around them, temperature dropping steadily as stars brightened in the clear. Mountain sky. From down the pass, occasional sounds reached them. Distant voices, the crack of branches, once the distinct whicker of a horse. The search party was making camp for the night. Too far to detect them, but close enough to pose a substantial threat come morning. In the darkness of their shelter, Emma eventually drifted to sleep against Isabella's chest, her breathing deep and regular despite the tension surrounding her. Isabella remained awake, hyper-aware of every sound, every shift in the night air, every subtle movement from Caleb's vigilant form. "Sleep if you can," he advised, his voice a barely audible murmur. "I'll watch. Dawn will bring decisions, and if they find our trail tomorrow?" Caleb's response carried the weight of absolute conviction. "They won't take you. Either we escape clean, or I ensure you get clear, regardless of cost." The simple declaration, delivered without drama or emphasis, nonetheless conveyed a commitment that transcended duty or obligation. In the darkness, Isabella reached out, her hand finding his arm and resting there, a touch that acknowledged what remained unspoken between them. "Together," she corrected softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The night silence wrapped around this affirmation, bearing witness to boundaries crossed and futures intertwined, even as danger crept steadily closer through the mountain. Darkness. The first hints of dawn found Caleb already outside their shelter, reading the landscape with the focused intensity of a man whose survival depended on such skills. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears. Fresh tracks in the new dusting of snow that had fallen overnight, barely 50 yards down the pass. "They're closer than I thought," he reported, returning to Isabella, who was preparing Emma for the day's journey. "Professional tracker, moving ahead of the main group, Redfeather almost certainly." "He'll find us," Isabella stated, not a question, but an acknowledgement of reality. Caleb nodded grimly. "Matter of hours, not days. Man reads signs like most read books. Then we run. Not that simple." Caleb's expression was calculating, weighing variables and outcomes with mechanical precision. "Running leaves a clearer trail. Elevations higher. Ahead, snow deeper. With the baby—" He didn't need to finish. Isabella understood the mathematics of pursuit. Encumbered quarry could not outpace unencumbered hunters, particularly in challenging terrain. "What then?" she asked, securing Emma's. "A carrier with practiced movements." Caleb's decision crystallized with the clarity that had once made him the finest gunsmith in America. A problem analyzed, solution formulated, execution planned with precision. "Two paths forward," he explained, gathering specific items from their supplies and distributing weight between their packs with new purpose. "You and Emma take the trail to Hidden Valley, 3 miles ahead, marked by twin peaks shaped like wolf's ears. Can't miss it once you see it." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "And you?" "I create diversion, lead tracker away, circle back to meet you in the valley." He met her gaze directly. "Only viable strategy." "No." The word emerged with surprising force. "We agreed last night. Together, whatever comes." "This isn't abandonment," Caleb countered, his voice gentle but firm. "It's tactics. Separation is temporary, not permanent." "And if something happens to you?" Isabella challenged. "Emma and I alone in the wilderness, we don't know." Caleb withdrew a folded paper from his inner pocket, a hand-drawn map more detailed than the one he had shown her previously. "Complete route to Fort Benton, landmarks clear, distances accurate, Hidden Valley marked with supplies cached, enough to sustain you until spring if necessary. The thoroughness of these preparations revealed how deeply he had considered their situation, not just immediate survival, but contingencies beyond his own involvement. Isabella's heart constricted at the implication. This was your plan all along, wasn't it? To get us to safety, then return to your solitude. The question struck closer to truth than Caleb wanted to acknowledge. Was, he admitted after a moment. Before the canyon, before the avalanche, before... He gestured vaguely between them, unwilling or unable to name the connection that had formed. I won't leave you to face them alone, Isabella insisted, resolving to harden her voice. Daniel died alone. I won't let that happen again. Different situation. Caleb tucked the map firmly into her coat pocket despite her protests. Not planning to die, planning to outsmart then return, but you need contingency regardless. Emma chose that moment to make a soft cooing sound, reaching one tiny hand toward Caleb as she had increasingly done throughout their journey. The simple gesture affected him more powerfully than any argument Isabella might have presented. All right, he conceded, his weathered face softening as he allowed the baby to grasp his finger. Alternative approach, together to the valley entrance. If the tracker still follows, I create a diversion there, where you'll have protection of the valley's natural defenses. This compromise, though still not ideal from Isabella's perspective, acknowledged both the tactical realities and the emotional truth between them. She nodded reluctantly. I agree, but with one condition. You take no unnecessary risks. Your return is the priority, not slowing their pursuit. The unspoken depth of this condition, that his survival mattered to her beyond practical considerations, hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to articulate the full implications. Agreed, Caleb replied simply. They departed as dawn, fully illuminated the pass, moving with renewed urgency, but also heightened caution. Caleb employed every trick he had learned in 15 years of mountain survival, using rocky outcroppings where they would leave no tracks, doubling back occasionally to monitor their trail, creating false leads where the terrain allowed. Despite these precautions, by mid-morning, he detected signs that their pursuer was gaining. Twice he spotted movement on the ridgeline above them, fleeting shadows that confirmed they were being tracked by someone skilled enough to parallel their route from higher ground. Red Feather, he confirmed grimly after the second sighting, moving faster than anticipated. Their pace increased, pushing the limits of Isabella's endurance. The twin peaks Caleb had described, the wolf's ears that marked the entrance to Hidden Valley, now appeared on the horizon, perhaps an hour's journey ahead if they maintained their current speed. They might have made it had nature not intervened. Without warning, a massive golden eagle burst from the rocks above them, startled by their unexpected presence in its hunting territory. The bird's explosive departure dislodged several small stones, creating a miniature avalanche that clattered. Down the slope, the noise, though relatively minor, carried across the silent winter landscape like a signal shot. From somewhere behind them, a man's voice called out in response, words indistinct but meaning clear. They had been spotted. Run, Caleb ordered, all pretense of stealth abandoned. Valley entrance is the choke point, only defensible position. They surged forward, Caleb taking Emma's carrier to free Isabella for faster movement. The added weight barely seemed to affect his pace as he navigated the increasingly steep trail leading toward the twin peaks. Behind them, voices multiplied, at least 3 men coordinating their approach. A shot rang out, the bullet striking snow 20 feet to their right, a warning rather than a serious attempt, designed to slow rather than kill. Almost there, Caleb encouraged as Isabella stumbled, exhaustion and fear combining to rob her legs of strength. See that narrow gap between the ridges? That's the entrance. Indeed, the twin peaks now loomed directly ahead, and between them a natural gateway, barely 30 feet wide, the sole entrance to Hidden Valley according to Caleb's description. Beyond this bottleneck lay safety, at least temporarily. They reached the entrance as another shot cracked behind them, this one closer, kicking up stone fragments from the cliff face to their left. Caleb paused just long enough to return Emma to Isabella's care. Through the entrance, find cover immediately right. Natural rock formation provides shelter. His instructions were rapid but precise. Don't emerge until you hear my signal. 3 short whistles, like meadowlark. Caleb, Isabella began, fear evident in her eyes. Go, he urged, his voice softening despite the urgency. Trust me. Their eyes held for a moment, a world of unspoken emotion compressed into seconds, before Isabella nodded once and hurried. Through the narrow gap, with Emma clutched protectively against her. Alone now, Caleb positioned himself strategically. The entrance to Hidden Valley created a natural funnel that would force pursuers to approach in single file, negating their numerical advantage. More importantly, the rocky terrain offered multiple shooting positions from which he could control the approach without exposing himself unduly. Selecting the optimal location, a recessed position behind a boulder with clear sightlines, Caleb readied his rifle and settled in to wait, his breathing slowing to the measured rhythm of an experienced marksman. He didn't wait long. Within minutes, a figure appeared on the trail below. A tall man moving with the fluid grace of someone equally at home in wilderness and war. His clothing blended elements of native and white design, and he carried a Winchester rifle with practiced ease. Though they had never met, Caleb recognized him immediately from reputation. Redfeather, he murmured to himself, adjusting his aim slightly. The tracker paused, scanning the terrain ahead with methodical precision. Behind him, 2 more men appeared. White men in expensive cold-weather gear, the same individuals Caleb had encountered and misled days earlier. Redfeather raised a hand, signaling his companions to halt while he studied the approach to the valley entrance. His experienced eye had detected something, perhaps the subtle compression of snow from their passage, perhaps the too perfect positioning of Caleb's current shelter. Decision time arrived. Caleb could fire now, likely eliminating the immediate threat but revealing his position. Or he could wait, hoping to create a more effective diversion with less risk. The choice was made for him when one of the white men grew impatient, pushing past Redfeather toward the valley entrance. They went this way, the man insisted. Woman and child clear as day. Caleb squeezed the trigger. His shot struck precisely where intended. Not the man himself, but the rock face inches from his head. The impact sent stone fragments flying, driving all 3 pursuers to cover. Next one won't miss, Caleb called out, his voice echoing between the cliff faces. Leave now. This ends. A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft whisper of wind through the peaks. Then Redfeather's voice responded. Calm, measured, almost conversational. You must be Thorn. Heard you died years back. The recognition jolted Caleb. His identity had been his most closely guarded secret since St. Louis. Name's not important, he replied. Your business with the woman is finished. Our business is with Wyatt Bannister, came the response. Man pays well for completed tasks. Woman has something he wants. Evidence of his crimes, Caleb countered. Murder, corruption. A different voice answered. One of the white men. $50 added to what Bannister's already paying if you surrender the woman. $100 if you include whatever documents she's carrying. The crude attempt at negotiation told Caleb everything he needed to know about his opponents. These weren't men bound by principle or even loyalty, merely mercenaries following the highest bidder. Counter-offer, Caleb replied, shifting positions slightly for a better angle. You leave now, you live. Simple mathematics. A shot answered him, the bullet striking well wide of his position, a probing attempt rather than serious effort. Caleb responded with controlled precision, his bullet removing the hat from the shooter's head without harming the man beneath it. "That's one warning," he called. "Won't be another." Redfeather's voice carried a new note of respect. "Stories about your shooting weren't exaggerated, it seems, but there are 3 of us, 1 of you. Women are slowing you down. Child makes her vulnerable. Time favors us, Thorn." "You assume I'm alone?" Caleb bluffed, simultaneously calculating his actual tactical position. He had limited ammunition, no reinforcements, and responsibility for 2 vulnerable civilians. Against professional killers, the mathematics indeed favored his opponents. What happened next changed everything. From the valley entrance behind him, a rifle shot cracked with unexpected violence. One of the white pursuers cried out, clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him with surgical precision. Isabella's voice rang out clearly. "The next one goes through his heart. I was raised shooting with my father from age 8. Never missed." A vital target. Caleb suppressed both admiration and alarm. Isabella had disobeyed his instructions to remain hidden, instead positioning herself to provide covering fire. A tactical decision that increased their immediate firepower, but potentially exposed her to danger. 2 guns against 3, Redfeather observed, though his tone suggested recalculation rather than confidence. "Plus, whatever awaits in the valley itself," Isabella added, building on the deception with remarkable composure. "The Blackfeet who shelter here might take issue with trespassers." This fabrication, delivered with perfect conviction, created visible uncertainty among their pursuers. Redfeather, especially familiar with tribal territories and politics, would understand the potential complications of violating native ground. The standoff balanced on a knife's edge, both sides armed, determined, and aware that the next move might unleash violence from which there would be no return. It was Emma who broke the impasse. From her carrier, the baby began to cry, not her usual soft fussing but genuine distress, perhaps responding to the tension surrounding her. The sound, so unmistakably that of an innocent infant, carried clearly to the men below. Redfeather stood. Slowly, his rifle pointed skyward in the universal sign of temporary truce. "A moment to consider," he called to his companions, drawing them into huddled conversation. Caleb used the opportunity to move to Isabella's position. "Told you to stay hidden," he whispered, though without real anger. "Tactical adjustment," she replied simply. "Needed clear shot." Their eyes met, mutual respect mingling with shared determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. After what seemed an interminable discussion, Redfeather approached alone, stopping at a respectful distance where both Caleb and Isabella could cover him without difficulty. "Proposition," he announced. Bannister's instructions were specific. "Return with the woman and child, plus any evidence she carries. But instructions can be fulfilled in various ways." "Meaning?" Caleb demanded, rifle steady. "Meaning death wasn't specified, just confirmation." Redfeather's expression remained neutral. "Perhaps we found remains. Storm victims. Identifiable. Personal effects. Tragic but conclusive." Isabella's sharp intake of breath conveyed her understanding. "You'd lie to Bannister." "For appropriate compensation," Redfeather confirmed. "Man's money spends, but his reach has limits. These mountains have their own rules." Caleb's tactical mind rapidly assessed this unexpected development. "What's appropriate? Compensation in your calculation?" "The rifle you're holding," Redfeather replied without hesitation. "Recognize your work immediately. Thorn design custom modifications, worth more than Bannister's payment and less likely to attract unwanted." "Attention!" The request struck at Caleb's core identity. The weapon represented his first creation in 15 years that hadn't been dismantled, the physical embodiment of his emerging redemption. Yet it was just a tool, while Isabella and Emma's lives were beyond value. "Agreed," he stated. "Decision made, plus supplies for your return journey, in exchange for personal effects sufficient to convince Bannister, and your word, this ends here." Redfeather nodded once, the agreement sealed with the simplicity common to men accustomed to wilderness justice. Details were arranged with surprising efficiency, Isabella providing a distinctive brooch and handkerchief that would be recognizable as hers, Caleb adding provisions from their supplies to support the tracker's story of an extended search. Redfeather prepared to depart with his companions. He paused, studying Caleb with unexpected intensity. "Two hawks spoke of you," he said finally. "Said a broken gunsmith would find his purpose in these mountains." Seems he was right. Before Caleb could respond to this revelation of connection, Redfeather had turned away, rejoining his companions for the journey back to civilization and the lie they would deliver to Wyatt Bannister. With their departure, the tension that had sustained both Caleb and Isabella through the confrontation finally released. She sagged against the rock face. Emma clutched protectively against her chest. "Is it really over?" she whispered, disbelief mingling with desperate hope. Caleb studied the retreating figures until they disappeared around a bend in the trail. "For now," he answered honestly. "Bannister may eventually discover the deception, but by then you'll be established elsewhere, beyond his reach." "We," Isabella corrected softly, "beyond his reach." The simple amendment contained a universe of implication, future, connection, continuity. Caleb turned to meet her gaze, finding in her eyes the question that had remained unspoken throughout. Their journey. Hidden Valley first, he decided, gesturing toward the natural gateway between the twin peaks. Rest, recover, plan what comes next. They entered the valley together, as afternoon light gilded the surrounding peaks with amber radiance. The space beyond the narrow entrance opened dramatically, a sheltered bowl perhaps 2 miles across, ringed by protective mountains. Its floor, covered with pine forest and open meadows, where a small herd of elk grazed, undisturbed by human presence. Near the center, beside a spring that steamed slightly in the winter air, stood a small cabin, more substantial than a temporary shelter, but humbler than Caleb's former home. He led Isabella directly to this structure, opening the weathered door to reveal a simple interior stocked with basic supplies. "Two Hawks' place," he explained. "Old man's been gone 3 winters now. Told me before he passed that someone else might need it someday." Isabella entered slowly, Emma still secured against her chest. The cabin was cold but intact, its construction solid enough to have weathered Montana winters without human attendance. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while simple furnishings, a bed frame, table, 2 chairs, stood ready for use. "It's perfect," she whispered, emotions finally overflowing after days of forced composure. "We made it." As Caleb built a fire, in the long, cold hearth, the first tendrils of warmth beginning to reclaim the space, Isabella settled on a bench near the growing flames, finally unwrapping Emma from her carrier. The baby stretched contentedly, seemingly aware that their ordeal had reached a turning point. "We'll rest here until you're both stronger," Caleb explained, his movements efficient as he inventoried the cabin's resources. "Valley provides everything needed. Game, firewood, protection from storms. Come spring, we can decide next steps. And what do you want those steps to be?" Isabella asked directly, voicing the question that would determine all others. Caleb paused. 15 years of isolation balanced against these past days of connection, purpose, and rediscovered meaning. The solitude that had once seemed his sanctuary now appeared more like a sentence, self-imposed punishment for crimes he hadn't committed. "Don't know how to be around people anymore," he finally admitted. "Forgot the language of it, the expectations." "I'm not asking you to return to society," Isabella clarified. "I'm asking if you want to remain with us, wherever that journey leads." Emma chose that moment to reach toward Caleb, as she had done increasingly throughout their time together. Tiny hands grasping for connection, dark eyes focused on him with that unnervingly adult awareness. "She knows," Isabella said softly. Children sense things adults miss. She's trusted you from the beginning. Caleb knelt beside them, allowing Emma to grasp his finger as had become their custom. The simple contact grounded him, providing clarity. Where confusion had reigned, yes, he said simply, whatever comes next, I want to face it with you, both of you. The admission, unadorned by qualification or condition, bridged the final distance between them. Isabella's free hand came to rest against his weathered cheek, the touch conveying more than words could express. "Then that's what we'll do," she replied, her voice steady with newfound certainty. "Together." Outside the cabin, snow began to fall. Again, not the violent blizzard that had pursued them through the canyon, but gentle flakes drifting lazily through still air. Inside, the fire crackled with increasing confidence, reclaiming the space that had awaited their arrival. In the months and years that followed, Hidden Valley would become many things to them: sanctuary, home, new beginning. The widow left to die, and the reclusive gunsmith who saved her would build something neither had believed possible after their respective tragedies. And Emma, the infant survivor whose presence had catalyzed their unlikely connection, would grow strong in this protected place, surrounded by wilderness and love in equal measure. Her laughter eventually joining the wind's song through mountain passes where once only danger had echoed. For now, though, as afternoon faded toward evening in their newfound shelter, there was only this moment of arrival and recognition, the end of one journey and the quiet, hopeful beginning of another. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.